The Galactic Command's central war room was a gleaming dome of steel and light, suspended above the capital planet of Zalon Prime. Commander Valen Threx, a figure of unyielding authority, loomed over a holographic map of the galaxy. The shimmering display detailed the Empire's dominion, vast stretches of star systems bowing under its might. In his mind, the galaxy was orderly, predictable, and entirely under his control. Humans, Threx muttered, his voice a mixture of disdain and boredom. The word felt almost beneath him to say. A junior officer had dared to bring up a report about them. What of these primitives? The officer hesitated, his tone trembling. Their sector has reported unusual activity. Supply routes in the Axaria system have gone dark. Dark? Threx raised an eyebrow, his piercing golden eyes narrowing. Explain. The orbital supply station is gone, sir. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Threx's gaze bore into the officer, as if daring him to continue with what he knew would be a pathetic explanation. Gone? Destroyed by whom? No confirmation yet, but... The officer swallowed. Human activity was detected in the vicinity. The room erupted in low murmurs of disbelief. Threx slammed his fist against the control console, silencing the chatter. Ridiculous. Humans couldn't destroy a pebble, let alone a station of that magnitude. Their technology is barely past chemical propulsion. Another officer stepped forward, his expression cautious. Sir, I reviewed the tactical logs. There was no indication of fleet activity. The station shields failed, and the explosion seemed deliberate. Threx's jaw tightened. A malfunction, perhaps? The precision suggests otherwise, Commander. The officer replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Threx leaned back, crossing his arms. He couldn't comprehend the notion of humans being capable of anything significant. To him, they were a curiosity, a fleeting evolutionary accident on an irrelevant blue planet. Their ships, primitive and lumbering, had barely survived prior skirmishes. The Empire hadn't even bothered annexing Earth directly, deeming it more trouble than it was worth. And yet, here was evidence, baffling, infuriating evidence, that suggested otherwise. Send a reconnaissance team, Threx ordered sharply. If these insects are involved, I want to know how. As the room dispersed, Threx lingered, staring at the map. The Axaria system flickered ominously. His confidence, while unshaken, bore the faintest crack. Humans? Impossible. And yet the impossible now demanded his attention. Hours later, the report from Axaria arrived, and with it, a new wave of confusion. Survivors, those few who had managed to escape in emergency pods, described an invisible enemy. We didn't see them. One pilot had stammered in the recording. One moment, everything was normal. The next, systems started failing. Shields collapsed, reactors overloaded. It was like they were inside our systems. Inside? Threx hissed, replaying the recording. His advisors, gathered in the dimly lit chamber, avoided his eyes. The idea was preposterous. Humans couldn't infiltrate Imperial systems. Their understanding of cybernetic warfare was laughable. Yet there it was, an attack with no visible assailant, no warning, and no traceable signature. Commander, ventured diplomatic advisor Selev Tarek, his voice calm but edged with concern. Might I suggest we've underestimated them? Underestimated? Threx spat. Humans are an evolutionary cul-de-sac. There is nothing to underestimate. Respectfully, Commander, Tarek continued. If they are responsible, their methods indicate a profound strategic capability. We cannot afford arrogance. Threx bristled but said nothing. He stared at the hologram, his mind racing. Could it be true? Could these pathetic creatures have found a way to challenge the Empire? We will respond with overwhelming force, he declared at last. Assemble a fleet and deploy to the surrounding sectors. If humans are bold enough to act against us, they will learn the price of defiance. The room echoed with affirmations, but as the officers departed, Tarek lingered. Commander, he said quietly, perhaps we should first understand why they're striking. Threx didn't look at him. His voice was cold. Because they're fools, Tarek. And fools deserve annihilation. But even as the words left his mouth, doubt gnawed at the edges of Threx's certainty. Why would humans, a species so woefully outmatched, invite destruction upon themselves? And why now, after decades of complacency? Questions loomed, unanswered and unwelcome, as the galaxy's most powerful commander prepared for war. The command deck of the Aegis Resolve was alive with quiet efficiency, every officer focused on their task. Admiral Elena Voss stood at the center, her posture radiating a calm authority that belied the enormity of their undertaking. The holographic map before her displayed the results of the Axaria strike, its success marked by a single, glowing point of light. "Status report," she said, her voice sharp but measured. "Imperial fleet in disarray," reported Lieutenant Kieran, a tactical officer with a reputation for precision. "They've deployed reconnaissance units but are hesitant to mobilize their main forces without clearer intelligence. We've planted enough false signals to keep them chasing shadows." "Good," Voss replied. "And the Axaria survivors?" "Spreading confusion as planned. Their descriptions are inconsistent, fueling speculation but offering no actionable data." Voss allowed herself a brief smile. "Let them wonder. A frightened enemy is already half defeated." She turned to the gathered officers, her gaze sweeping the room. "The Empire thrives on predictability, its fleets, its bureaucracy, its tactics. We will give them none of it. They expect battleships, we'll strike from the shadows. They expect armies, we'll dismantle their infrastructure. Every assumption they make will be a weakness for us to exploit." The room hummed with quiet approval. They understood the stakes. Humanity's survival depended on the success of these strikes. There could be no mistakes, no hesitation. Meanwhile, deep in the Ephra Nebula, another phase of the operation unfolded. The Imperial Convoy, a procession of colossal transport ships and their escorts, cruised through the swirling clouds of gas and debris. Their path was meticulously chosen, isolated, away from major trade routes. It was supposed to be a secure transit, invisible to all but the Empire's most trusted operatives. And yet, the convoy never reached its destination. As the lead ship began transmitting its final position, its systems abruptly failed. Communications, navigation, life support, all were systematically shut down. One by one, the other ships followed, their once mighty engines now silent hulks drifting aimlessly. The escorts, heavily armed and prepared for any visible threat, were powerless against an enemy that never appeared. Back on the Eternal Dominion, Commander Valen Threx watched the fragmented distress signals with mounting frustration. "Report," he demanded, his voice slicing through the tense atmosphere. The officers scrambled to analyze the data, but the answers eluded them. "No visual contacts," one finally admitted. "The ships were disabled remotely. It's as if the enemy was inside our systems." Threx clenched his fists, the veins in his temples pulsing with barely contained rage. "How is that possible? Humans don't have the capability for such precision attacks." No one dared to answer. The room was thick with an unspoken truth. The humans had proven themselves far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. On the Aegis Resolve, Voss reviewed the operation's success with quiet satisfaction. "What's the status of the Imperial response?" she asked. "They're paralyzed," Tyrion replied. "They don't know where to send reinforcements or how to counter us. Every time they move, we're already gone." Voss nodded. "Good. But we must remain disciplined. Overconfidence is the Empire's flaw. It will not be ours." She tapped a command into the console, bringing up a schematic of the Empire's communication network. "Their strength lies in coordination. Disrupt that, and they'll collapse under their own weight. Target their relay stations next. Without them, their fleets will be blind and scattered." As the officers began their preparations, Voss turned to Commander Yannick, her second-in-command. "Thoughts?" she asked. Yannick hesitated, then spoke. "We've caught them off guard, but they won't stay that way forever. Eventually they'll adapt. And when they do, we'll need to be ready." Voss's expression hardened. Then we make sure they never get the chance. We keep them chasing ghosts until there's nothing left to chase. In the Empire's core worlds, panic began to spread. Rumors of an invisible, unstoppable enemy circulated among the lower ranks and civilian populations. The once invincible Empire now seemed vulnerable, its fleets and infrastructure unraveling without a single battle fought. Back on the Eternal Dominion, diplomatic advisor Selev Tarek approached Commander Threx with a grim proposal. "Perhaps it's time we considered negotiation," he said cautiously. "If the humans have developed this level of technology, we must ask ourselves what else they're capable of." Threx's response was immediate and furious. "Negotiation? With primitives? No. We will crush them, as we have crushed all who dared oppose us." But even as he spoke, the doubt in his voice was unmistakable. The Empire's strength had always been its certainty, its unshakable belief in its own superiority. Now, for the first time, that certainty was slipping away. For humanity, this was the beginning of something greater. The Empire saw their strikes as acts of desperation, but for Voss and her crew, they were acts of transformation. Every blow against the Empire was a step toward a future where humanity would no longer be the galaxy's underdog. As the Aegis Resolve slipped into the void, its crew prepared for the next phase of their campaign. The galaxy was vast, the Empire powerful, but humanity had one thing the Empire lacked: the ability to adapt, to innovate, to surprise. And in a war where every assumption could be a fatal flaw, that was the greatest weapon of all. The command chamber of the Eternal Dominion was thick with tension, its air almost suffocating under the weight of failure. Commander Valen Threx stood before the galaxy-wide map, his golden eyes scanning the glowing trails of disrupted trade routes and fractured military supply lines. Every report coming in painted the same humiliating picture: humanity was dismantling the Empire's operations piece by piece, and no one seemed able to stop it. "Enough!" Threx's voice cut through the uneasy murmurs of his officers. "I want solutions, not excuses." An adjutant stepped forward hesitantly, his face pale under the harsh light. "Commander, the enemy's movements remain unpredictable. They strike and disappear before we can react. Our ships are responding to phantoms." Threx's glare froze him in place. "And what of our intelligence networks? Are they as blind as the fleets?" "We've deployed additional agents," another officer interjected. "But the humans have cloaked their operations with remarkable precision. Every lead we've pursued has turned out to be a decoy." Threx clenched his fists. "Unacceptable. These vermin have no right to challenge us. How can a species so pathetic command such precision?" Selev Tarek, standing at the edge of the room, finally spoke. "Perhaps, Commander, the problem lies in our assumptions. Humanity has always been resourceful, even if their resources are limited." Threx turned to him, his tone sharp. "You're suggesting we've underestimated them?" "Again?" "I'm suggesting, Commander," Tarek replied, his voice steady, "that we're fighting an enemy unlike any we've faced before. Their methods are unconventional. They use what they have to maximum effect, exploiting every weakness we didn't know we had." The room fell silent, the truth of Tarek's words hanging heavy in the air. Threx hated to admit it, but the humans had turned the Empire's strength into its greatest vulnerability. Their reliance on centralized communication and logistics, once seen as unassailable, had become a glaring weakness under humanity's relentless assaults. "Then we force them into the open," Threx said at last. "They thrive in the shadows, so we will deprive them of it. Set a trap, something they cannot resist." His officers exchanged uneasy glances. "A trap, Commander?" one ventured. "With respect, they've avoided every predictable engagement. How do we ensure they'll take the bait?" Threx smirked, a cruel glint in his eyes. "We make the bait too tempting to ignore. Deploy a decoy fleet in the Valaris sector. Fill it with high-value resources and ensure the humans know it's vulnerable. But have the true fleet waiting nearby, cloaked and ready to strike." The officers nodded and moved to execute the plan, their fear of failure outweighed only by their fear of Threx's wrath. But Tarek lingered, his expression troubled. Do you doubt the plan, Tarek? Threx asked, his tone mocking. I doubt the enemy will act as we expect, Tarek replied carefully. They've built their strategy on unpredictability. They may see through this. Threx's gaze hardened. Then they will prove their arrogance, and we will crush them. The Valaris sector operation unfolded as planned, or so it seemed. The decoy fleet, a tempting array of supply ships and lightly armed escorts, drifted through the void. Scouting drones detected faint traces of human presence, faint energy signatures, fleeting sensor echoes. The trap was set. But as the hours passed, no attack came. The tension aboard the waiting Imperial fleet grew unbearable. Then, without warning, the trap itself was sprung, not by the Empire, but by humanity. Across the sector, Imperial ships began to report malfunctions. Engines stalled, targeting systems glitched, and cloaking devices failed spectacularly. The humans had bypassed the bait entirely, striking directly at the hidden fleet. By the time the Empire realized what was happening, their ships were dead in the water, drifting aimlessly through space. Threx's fury knew no bounds when the reports reached him. How? He roared, his voice echoing through the command chamber. How could they have known? Selev Tarek answered, his tone grim. Because they anticipated our response, Commander. Every step we've taken has been exactly what they wanted. Threx's glare burned into him. And what would you suggest, Tarek? Surrender? No, Commander, Tarek replied. I suggest we stop treating them as prey and start treating them as equals. The suggestion was met with a mix of gasps and murmurs. Threx's expression twisted into a snarl, but even he couldn't deny the growing truth. The humans had outmaneuvered them at every turn, not through superior numbers or firepower, but through sheer ingenuity and adaptability. We are the Empire, Threx said at last, his voice low and dangerous. We do not negotiate with pests. Tarek's response was calm, almost resigned. Then we will continue to lose. In the shadows of the galaxy, aboard the Aegis Resolve, Admiral Elena Voss reviewed the latest reports. The Valaris operation had been a resounding success, further crippling the Empire's ability to mount an effective counteroffensive. Her crew worked with quiet efficiency, their confidence bolstered by every victory. They'll grow desperate now, said Commander Yannick, standing at her side. Desperation makes them dangerous. Voss nodded. But desperation also makes them predictable. The more they lash out, the more they reveal their weaknesses. She turned to the map, her gaze fixed on the Empire's core worlds. We've shaken them, but we're not done yet. The final blow is coming, and when it does, they'll never recover. Her words carried a quiet certainty, a conviction born not from arrogance, but from the knowledge that humanity had already achieved the impossible. The galaxy's greatest empire was faltering, and its leaders were too blind to see the truth. Their time was over. The imperial capital burned, its towering spires shrouded in smoke as chaos unfolded across Ceylon Prime. From the distant orbit of the Aegis Resolve, Admiral Elena Voss watched the spectacle in silence. Her hands rested lightly on the console before her, but her mind was sharp, focused. This was no time for celebration. Humanity had struck a decisive blow, but the war was not yet over. Admiral, all designated targets have been neutralized, reported Lieutenant Kieran, his tone professional but edged with awe. The central relay stations are offline, and their fleets are paralyzed without centralized command. Voss gave a single nod. Any signs of counterattacks? None so far, he replied. They're scrambling to re-establish communications, but it'll take weeks, if not longer. She turned her gaze to the tactical display, which now showed a fractured web of the Empire's once mighty network. With every relay destroyed, their forces had been reduced to isolated fragments, unable to coordinate or support one another. It was a vulnerability humanity had exploited with ruthless efficiency. Maintain full stealth protocols, she ordered. They're wounded, but desperation makes even the most predictable enemy dangerous. A message pinged on the console, and Commander Yannick stepped forward. Admiral, we've intercepted a transmission. It's from the Eternal Dominion. They're requesting terms. The bridge fell silent. The Empire, once the unchallenged ruler of the galaxy, was asking for negotiations. Voss allowed herself a brief moment to process the weight of the moment. The enemy who had deemed humanity insignificant now sought dialogue. "Open the channel," she said at last, her voice calm. The hollow display flickered to life, and the visage of Commander Valen Threx appeared. His once imposing figure seemed diminished, his expression a mixture of fury and desperation. Behind him, the command center of the Eternal Dominion was a chaotic flurry of activity, officers scrambling to restore order. "Admiral Voss," Threx began, his tone icy. "You've proven resourceful. But this game of shadows cannot continue indefinitely. What is it you want?" Voss regarded him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her words were deliberate. "What we want is irrelevant, Commander. What matters is that you now understand what it means to be underestimated." Threx's jaw tightened. "You believe this is over? That your acts of sabotage and cowardice are victories? The Empire does not fall to insurgents." Voss tilted her head slightly. "And yet here we are. Your fleets are scattered, your command network is broken, and your empire is on the verge of collapse. Tell me, Commander, who is truly desperate here?" Threx leaned forward, his voice rising. "Do not mistake a momentary advantage for dominance. We still outnumber you 1,000 to 1. Our resources are limitless. You cannot possibly hope to sustain this war." "Perhaps," Voss said, her tone steady. "But we don't need to sustain it. We only need to make you question the cost of continuing it." Threx fell silent, his glare burning through the projection. Voss could see the calculation in his eyes, the unspoken fear that his empire's invincibility was no longer assured. Before he could respond, she continued. "You've built your empire on the belief that power is absolute, that strength alone defines victory. Humanity has shown you the flaw in that belief. We've exposed the cracks in your foundation, and now you're crumbling under your own weight." The silence between them stretched, thick with tension. Finally, Threx spoke, his voice lower but no less dangerous. "And what do you intend to do with this advantage? Conquer us? Replace the Empire with your own tyranny?" Voss shook her head. "We have no interest in conquest, Commander. Humanity's goal has never been domination, it's survival. You made us your enemy, and we adapted. Now we offer you a choice: continue this war and face annihilation, or stand down and reconsider what it means to coexist." The projection flickered as Threx leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You speak of coexistence, yet your methods are ruthless. What makes you different from us?" "Intent," Voss replied without hesitation. "We fight because we were given no other option. You fight because you believe the galaxy exists to serve you. That distinction is the difference between survival and oppression." Threx said nothing, his eyes narrowing as he weighed her words. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Your terms will be considered." The channel closed, and the bridge of the Aegis Resolve fell into a contemplative silence. Yannick was the first to speak. "Do you believe they'll stand down?" Voss exhaled, her gaze fixed on the distant glow of Zalon Prime. "No. But it doesn't matter. Whether they fight or surrender, the Empire as it was no longer exists. We've ensured that." The room buzzed softly with the quiet hum of activity as the crew continued their work. For humanity, this was more than a victory, it was a turning point. The galaxy had been shown that even the most unassuming of species could rise to challenge the mightiest of empires. As the Aegis Resolve slipped back into the shadowed expanse of space, Voss allowed herself a moment of reflection. This war had been thrust upon them, a fight for survival against an enemy who saw them as nothing more than pests. But humanity had proven, beyond any doubt, that underestimation was a fatal mistake. In the stillness of the void, the final message from humanity to the Empire echoed silently across the stars. "We are the underestimated. And we are inevitable."